It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, live from Ukraine. Our top story. Russia is accused of humanitarian hypocrisy as fighting continues across this country. Towns around the capital flattened, and outrage as the Kremlin creates safe routes that lead only to Russia and Belarus.
We will win with or without Western assistance, because you see how strong is Ukrainian.
The former president rallies troops near Kiev, there to secure the safe passage of civilians. The UN says 1.7 million people have now fled Ukraine, but the Prime Minister comes under fire for its visa process as people struggle to make it to the UK.
If they bomb this place, so so many people be dead.
So she needed to get out?
Yes, 100%.
And from Northern Ireland to Ukraine, the volunteers making it their mission to deliver aid to the people who need it. Plus, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30. And good evening from Western Ukraine tonight, where people are desperately trying to find safety from the war that rages across this country. The United Nations says 1.7 million refugees have now crossed the border into neighbouring countries. Meanwhile, peace talks between Russian and Ukrainian delegations ended today with little progress as a third attempt at a ceasefire failed, with Russian shelling preventing the evacuation of major towns and cities. And Vladimir Putin was accused of immoral tactics, creating humanitarian corridors that led directly into Russia and Belarus. Let's take a look at the situation on the ground here on day 12 of this conflict. Russian forces have continued massive air and artillery strikes on cities across the country, such as Mariupol and Mykolaiv in the south. But the UK Ministry of Defence says Russian forces have made minimal advances on the ground over the weekend, and there's evidence of Ukraine fighting back in some locations. In a moment, we'll hear from our special correspondent, Alex Crawford, in Kiev, and from Alistair Bunkle on the refugees fleeing to Romania. But first tonight, our defence and security editor, Deborah Haynes, is in Kiev and has this report on the developing humanitarian crisis.
Across Ukraine, the war rages on. Hear the sound of battle in the southern coastal city of Mykolaiv. While above another city in the east, Ukraine says it shot a Russian jet out of the sky. Sky News has verified the location of the footage in Kharkiv, though not who's hitting what. Ukraine's president urged the world to put even more pressure on Russia to end its war.
If the invasion continues and Russia doesn't give up its plans in regards to Ukraine, then a new set of sanctions needs to be introduced.
On a visit to Lithuania, the top US diplomat insisted unprecedented punishments by Western allies against Moscow are working.
We see the ruble going through the floor. We see Russia's credit rating coming basically to zero, to junk status, as we would call it. We see its stock market shut down. We see an exodus of virtually every leading company from Russia. All of those things are happening. They're happening in real time.
But President Vladimir Putin remains on the offensive. These images from his defense ministry show the moment an airstrike is launched. The US says some 600 Russian missiles have been fired against Ukraine in the past 12 days.
We are the women of Ukraine.
On the ground, it's not just men fending off Russia's attacks.
We will destroy the enemy on every inch of Ukrainian land, in every city, every village, forest and field.
Seeking safety from the fighting, people flee the port city of Odessa. In other areas, though, it's no longer safe to escape, and attempts to open humanitarian corridors keep failing. This is Mariupol, also on the coast, and the scene of some of the worst bombardments.
It has been established that the nationalists threatening violence are simply not releasing civilians and foreign citizens from the aforementioned locations.
But Ukraine's accused Russia of cynically only allowing safe passage to its territory or to its close ally Belarus.
This is an unacceptable option of creating humanitarian corridors. Our people from Ivankov, Daimar, Vyshgorod and Kyiv won't go to Belarus to fly later to Russia.
The two sides met again for a third round of talks, but no sign of any breakthrough as the bombs keep falling and Ukraine's military keeps resisting. Deborah Haynes, Sky News, Lviv, Western Ukraine.
Well, Russia's President Vladimir Putin was accused of setting immoral conditions on so-called humanitarian corridors for anyone trying to escape. The Defence Ministry spokesman said 6 corridors were open as of 7 a.m. to allow civilians to safely leave the cities of Kiev, Kharkiv, Sumy and Mariupol. But 4 of the 6 routes he talked about led into Belarus or Russia, something Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister says is unacceptable. She demanded that the Russians accept alternative routes to elsewhere in Ukraine. Our special correspondent Alex Crawford reports now on the people trying to find a way out of the capital.
They know all about civilians being attacked here. This small village community just south of the Ukrainian capital has been torn apart by Russian bombs. Almost an entire street disappeared in an instant. 3 children and 3 adults were killed, devastating their families and the whole neighborhood. The explosions have left a deep burning anger and a thirst for revenge amongst the men of the village who've taken up arms to defend their community and their country. I feel only hate, he tells us. We'll never, ever forgive them for this. Another says they have to close the skies. The rest of the world have to become involved and close the airspace above Ukraine. And their friend says, we'll keep on shooting them. Every time they shoot us, we'll shoot back, and we won't leave any alive. We're going to kill every single invader. Those who survived the explosions are still sifting through what's left of their lives to piece together precious possessions or memories. Oksana tells us how scared they all are. We can't sleep at night, she says. Whenever they hear sounds, they think it's another bombing, and they run out of the house. Her husband says the war has completely upended their lives and left them terrified. We've no idea what's going to happen, he says, when it's going to happen or where.
They're still reeling from the shock of it all, and I think it follows a pattern of an increasing number of civilians and civilian targets or civilian locations which appear to be targeted or certainly not off the agenda of the Russian war machine.
Civilians are in the crosshairs of this war. A brief respite in shelling and firing in Irpin on the outskirts of the capital meant those still trapped were finally able to escape. Remember, none of these people can be certain they won't be fired on again. And they know their neighbors who fled earlier were attacked.
Ukraine!
Ukraine's former president Petro Poroshenko has been busy rallying volunteer fighters and soldiers. He's among a growing list of people demanding safe passage for civilians. We were with him as he boosted morale and championed the bravery of the troops. Their job protecting the critically important southern route out of the capital is crucial, and he brought fresh weapons and supplies to help. If this route is taken by the Russian military, the capital will be encircled. If Ukrainians could win on defiance and courage, they would win. But they need more than defiance and courage, don't they? And at the moment, the capital is slowly being encircled.
First of all, remove the word if. we definitely win. This is first message. We will win with or without Western assistance, because you see how strong is Ukrainian, but it takes significantly more time and will need significantly more lives and blood. And this is just the decision from our partners in the West. Do you ready to give us the weapons? Do you ready to increase the sanction? Do you ready to do all of this to minimize Ukrainian blood and Ukrainian lives? Please do that immediately.
The former president took us to see another residential area which had been hit. Ukraine's heading for many more civilian deaths, he's warning, and there are few in the country confident enough to say otherwise right now. Alex Crawford, Sky News in Vasulkiv.
Let's have a look at the strategic situation on the ground then. Sky's Anna Jones is at the screen with Professor Michael Clark.
So, Michael, over the last few days, there's not been a huge amount of change on the ground across Ukraine, has there? But there is movement now. So let's take a look at the south of the country, first of all, and in particular, take a look at Mykolaiv, shall we? Because this is still in Ukrainian hands, but there are reports of fighting. So what do we know?
Yes, the Ukrainians have counterattacked at Mykolaiv. They're still fighting hard there, and that's quite important because Mykolaiv is the gateway to Odessa, which must be the next strategic target.
Well, yes, and there's reports of fighting and attacks on Russian tanks there, aren't there?
Yes, the Ukrainians have retaken the airport. The Russians are counter-attacking, we believe, with tank rounds. That's very important because the airport is the key to any strategic advantage over Mykolaiv itself.
And some action reported also in the Black Sea, according to the Ukrainians.
Yes, the Ukrainians say that they have targeted successfully one of the Russian ships. The Russians have got more than 30 ships in the Black Sea, including a task force ready to attack Odessa. But they can only attack Odessa from the sea when their troops get there overland from Mykolaiv, and that may take some time.
And what about what's happening in Mariupol as well? Because you've had reports of bombardments over the weekend and fighting continuing today.
Yes, no humanitarian corridors, no people out, no medicines in. The fact is, Mariupol is the symbol. We now know that Russian tactics are simply to attack the civilian populations. What happens in Mariupol will probably happen elsewhere in cities as they are surrounded.
Well, yes, and talking of surrounding cities, what are the implications of what Russia's doing in other cities for Kiev in the north of the country? It's still, of course, in Ukrainian hands at the moment, but there's that big convoy in the outskirts, isn't there?
Yes, I mean, the Russians are trying to encircle Kiev. They're making very hard work of it. And the Ukrainians are really counterattacking, I think, pretty effectively. There's a big battle going on at Irpin, near Hostomel airfield, where they've counterattacked successfully. So the Ukrainians are doing all they can to prevent this encirclement, both from the west and increasingly from the northeast as more Russian forces come in. Numbers will tell in the end. The Russians almost certainly will surround Kiev, but my goodness, the Ukrainians are slowing it down and making it very difficult for them.
And if that is the Russian intention to encircle these cities, what does that mean for how things might pan out in the next couple of days?
Effectively, the Russians will be saying to the Ukrainians, we can actually completely destroy the city, give in now, or we have no alternative. That's the choice the Ukrainians will face.
And Deborah Haynes joins me now. And Deborah, another video message from President Zelensky this evening, and he's addressing the UK Parliament tomorrow.
Yes, another video message from this selfie-loving president. You'll remember he actually announced the start of this war with what looked like a selfie video. And tonight, with this new release, he seemed to want to make very clear to people that he is still in Kyiv, using his phone and showing outside the window that he is actually still in his presidential office in the capital, saying that he is not retreating, we are not retreating, saying that negotiations are going to continue until he can find a way to say to his people, this is how we're going to achieve peace. Now, today we had that third round of talks between the two sides. Nothing coming of that. The two foreign ministers, Russia and Ukraine's, are due to meet on Thursday. And Ukraine's foreign minister again repeated this request from the Ukrainian side for an actual meeting between President Zelensky and the Russian President Vladimir Putin. But even so, there are talks. There is still no sign of any way the two sides can compromise with their positions very much entrenched. And you can't see a way forward without one side backing down.
OK, Deborah, thank you very much indeed. Well, the UN's refugee agency says that more than 1.7 million people have now fled this country. In Romania, hotels once accommodating holidaymakers have now been turned into makeshift refugee camps as nearly 80,000 people seek refuge there. Sky's Alistair Bunkle reports from the town of Siret on the Romanian side of the Ukrainian border, where he spoke to the people fleeing the conflict.
It is already Europe's worst refugee crisis since the Second World War, and this conflict isn't yet 2 weeks old. Ukrainians are leaving their country any way they can. This was a ferry crossing the Danube River in the south of the country. No one that we've spoken to wanted to make this journey, and they all blame one man.
How do you feel about terrorists? I feel the same to Vladimir Putin. I feel okay about Russians. I have a lot of relatives in Russia. I studied in Russia for 4 years. I feel okay about this country. I feel bad about the president and the government in general, because it's not fair to the nation, to his and to our.
This is what it's like travelling the other way. There are a few people making the journey, taking supplies into Ukraine or going to fight the Russians.
Twice I've taken supplies with the bus, and now I took the bus to go and bring some more.
In peacetime, this was a wedding hall at a smart hotel. It is now a refuge for families broken up by war.
That's where donations are from people. We also have posters there as well.
And people are arriving
constantly, yes. They come and go, come and go, come and go every day.
For some of them, it is a chance to sleep, the first they've had in days. They huddled together around mobile phones to listen to President Zelensky's latest address. Rallying calls to a nation under fire. Oksana was a teacher in Kiev. Her husband, a theatre actor, has stayed behind to fight. Having fled herself, she is now helping other refugees.
I was so scared about how it would be here, so many refugees, so many people, and so cold. But yesterday, when I come through the border, with all these people, all these Romanian people, like angels, they took us with their wings, yeah, and surrounded us with such warmth and hospitality and love, and they do everything that our suffering would be less.
We've met lawyers and waitresses, shop workers and journalists, housewives and grandmothers. A few weeks ago, everyone you see in these pictures had their own lives and identities. War has robbed them of so much. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News.
Well, tonight the Home Office has confirmed that 300 visa applications have been granted, with tens of thousands of people applying to stay in the UK. The UK government is now under pressure to ease the visa process. Sky's Ashna Huranag reports now from France on the journey to the UK.
When 8-year-old Zlata cried down the phone to her mum as the war raged outside her bedroom window, Mariana flew from the UK to her rescue. After days of travelling, they reunited on the Polish-Ukrainian border.
I just called like her name, Zlata, Zlata. It was very emotional. Then everyone cried.
Despite Mariana working as a nanny in London for 6 years, the pair were turned away at Calais, unable to re-enter the UK because Mariana's asylum application is still being processed. Her mum, meanwhile, has stayed behind.
If they bomb this place, so so many people be dead.
So she needed to get out?
Yes, 100%. My mom said, she also worried, and she just tell me, I leave all this like important paper. She just tell me like where she leave important paper. So if something happened, you know where is this paper. But I hope this finish soon.
An appointment with Border Force officials in Paris is their best bet for crossing the Channel. David and his Ukrainian wife and children wait on Dover's doorstep for the same outcome. After coming under fire in eastern Ukraine and finally making it to France, they too were barred from the UK. They've been told they need to drive 3 hours to Paris to now apply for a family visa.
Why can't I go home with my family, my Ukrainian family? I'm not asking for nothing from the government. I can pay for everything myself. I just want to take my family home and protect them. That's all I want to do.
We've heard from people who've been waiting for news in Paris, those here in Calais who've been turned away, and even those in the UK who are confused about their visa status. But as they seek sanctuary, their worries deepen too for the family and friends they've left behind. Those like Maria. She's in Derby visiting her mum on a holiday visa which expires within weeks. She's been told she can stay, but can't find clear guidance.
I see that UK government is doing something. I see that they are trying to make it better for Ukrainian refugees. But, well, please do more. Please allow people, even not relatives, to come. Well, we are good people. We're just trying to escape the war.
A plea many are hopeful will be heard, but tens of thousands are applying, knowing there's no guarantee of success. Ashna Harinag, Sky News in Calais.
Well, as the Prime Minister Boris Johnson put on a show of unity today with Canada's Justin Trudeau and the Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte, he was forced to defend the UK's response to the refugee crisis, saying the Home Office was processing thousands of applications right now. The three leaders were meeting to ramp up pressure on Russia and introduce more sanctions. It comes as MPs vote tonight on emergency legislation targeting Russian oligarchs. Our political editor, Beth Rigby, reports now on the UK's sanctions on Russia.
Three leaders in step, the PM with his Dutch and Canadian counterparts at RAF Northolt.
Hi guys, how are you? Nice to see you.
This a show of solidarity and strength as we enter the 12th day of war. Troops on standby to assist.
We may have to be calling on your services a lot more.
1,000 British soldiers already committed to providing humanitarian aid, and more may follow. When it comes to this crisis, there's no end in sight.
Well done. Well done.
Old allies and friends are more appreciated than ever.
We're united in many things.
And with many things to discuss as the West grapples with its response to war in Europe.
Putin is doubling down on his aggression and he is deciding to attack in a pretty indiscriminate way. That's producing huge waves of people. We're going to have to respond to that, and we will.
Over 1.5 million refugees already. How to help Ukraine and put paid to Putin's mission, the agenda for these men.
Prime Ministers, will Putin fail? Will Putin fail, sirs?
These leaders determined to make sure he does.
The world is clearly changing, and I think that what we can't do post the invasion of Ukraine is assume that we can go back to a kind of status quo ante, a kind of new normalization in the way that we did after the invasion of Crimea.
Russia, a pariah state that must be isolated. Financial sanctions in place, attention now on banning Russian oil imports.
It's too bad that we are so dependent on Russian oil, but we're not going to make that mistake again.
And in the meantime, this war only worsens. Can you de-escalate, or do you accept that you just have to let this play out and it's going to get a lot worse and it's going to take a long time?
At this moment, it is very difficult to de-escalate. At the same time, I'm happy that both Scholz but also Macron are still trying to get into contact with Putin.
The Prime Minister with the Canadian and Dutch leaders today, all of them putting on a united front and insisting that the West will eventually defeat Putin through economic, if not direct, military might. But there are questions too about whether the Prime Minister's rhetoric matches reality, with criticism in his own backyard over the slow sanctioning of Russian oligarchs and whether or not the UK's taking enough Ukrainian refugees. Tonight a promise to ramp up processing across Europe, but just 300 visas now issued against 18,000 applications in a matter of days. MPs on both sides are not convinced we're doing enough.
In 1972, we took into Kent thousands of Ugandan nations. We did it almost overnight and without any difficulty at all. Last Monday, my right honourable friend told me that she would cut away the red tape. Why aren't we doing it?
People who are being told to wait 72 hours after their security checks are all cleared just because of bureaucracy.
These not the last world leaders the PM will meet this week as he looks to play a leading role in the Western Front against Putin. But he'll be judged on the home front too when it comes to his handling of rich Russian oligarchs and refugees. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Westminster.
Well, the Prime Minister warned that the UK can't simply move away from Russia's oil and gas supply as pressure mounted to impose sanctions on energy. But even without action, talks were enough to make oil and gas prices surge again today. Sky's Paul Kelso has been looking at how the impact will be felt in the UK and in the rest of Europe.
The invasion of Ukraine has sent energy prices soaring with huge implications for the global economy and household budgets. But has the time come to take the ultimate sanction and ban Russian oil? That was a suggestion from US Secretary of State Antony Blinken at the weekend. And just look what it did to the oil price. Already rising since the invasion on February the 24th, it exceeded $139 a barrel at one point before falling back. And prices for next-day delivery of natural gas passed 600 pence a therm. That's almost double previous records that have driven up domestic fuel bills. And these price spikes came from just talking about an energy boycott. And while the West talks, Russia profits. It's the world's third largest oil producer behind the US and Saudi Arabia, turning out around 11 million barrels a day. That's more than 10% of global production. But it's the world's largest exporter. It sells more than anyone else abroad, and this is where it goes. Germany takes 30% of its oil from Russia. France and Italy and the UK more than 10%. South Korea, the US and Japan are also customers, all major economies fuelled by Russian oil. And Europe is even more reliant on Russian gas. So you can see the countries at the top of this chart in the east of Europe get almost all of their supplies from Russia. But Germany and Italy take almost half. France, nearly a quarter, though the UK imports just 4%. So the taps can't just be turned off. The global economy would have to be weaned off Russian oil with alternative sources found. But that might mean conversations with suppliers like Iran or Venezuela, themselves sanctioned, which explains why European leaders are more cautious about a boycott.
If we now would force European companies to quit doing business with Russia, that would have enormous ramifications around Europe, including Ukraine, but also around the world. So we have to dramatically reduce our dependency on gas and oil from Russia. That will take time.
An oil ban would certainly hurt the Russian economy, but every weapon in this economic war comes at a price, and families and consumers across Europe could pay it.
And finally from me tonight, heaven forbid it happened to us and nobody did anything. Those were the words of one businessman in County Down in Northern Ireland who began collecting aid for people in Ukraine and received an overwhelming response. Paul Devenny and his team have now driven the supplies 3,000 miles across Europe. Our Ireland correspondent Stephen Murphy reports on one man's mission to deliver aid to Ukraine.
An everyday business park in Northern Ireland transformed into an international aid depot. Here in Warrenpoint, County Down, an appeal by businessman Paul Devenny has snowballed.
So this is one of our sorting areas.
Every nook and cranny of Paul's office is jammed. A warehouse has been used as overflow.
Heaven forbid it happened to us and nobody did anything. And that's why I think we need to stand up, make ourselves counted and do something.
Throughout the afternoon, the deliveries just keep coming.
Another van load that's just arrived.
This is another van load that's just arrived. Can't turn people away.
But it's just not stopping.
It's just not stopping. That's the way people's generosity in this area, it's just been incredible.
After some frantic packing, 2 vans are loaded up. It's a pre-dawn start south to Dublin Port, where the team catch the ferry to Holyhead in Wales. A 6-hour drive across England to catch the next ferry from Harwich.
We were just up the Kiel services for coffee just outside Birmingham. That's us back on the road again.
Among the 4-man crew, a Ukrainian now living in Dublin.
My wife's family is in Ukraine, but they're not in Kyiv. They are close to Polish border. They, at the moment, are safe, but we never know what's happen next.
From England, the team catch a late ferry to Hook of Holland. Into day 2, and an already tired team faces a 14.5-hour drive. First, through the Netherlands.
Driving in Holland on the wrong side of the road.
Then across Germany and into Poland. Finally, they arrive in the city of Kielce. Here, the aid is transferred to Polish volunteers for the final leg into Ukraine. An exhausted team can now start the long haul home. By the time they reach Berlin, their cargo is already in Kiev.
It's absolutely incredible. And for our community, they've done what they've done. We should all be proud. And we should all realise what can be achieved when we all come together.
By the scale of the war's devastation, it may not seem like much, but Paul and his team know they've done everything they can. Stephen Murphy, Sky News.
Well done to them. That is it at the end of day 12 of this invasion. Now back to Anna in London.
Mark, thank you. Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in our extended press preview and news review, including this story on the front of the Metro. Their headline, "Pull Your Finger Out." There's The Guardian too. Kiev rejects Putin's offer to let people flee into Russia. Well, tonight we're joined by the political editor at the Daily Mirror, Pippa Crerar, and the political editor at The Sun, Harry Cullen.